Okay, I wanted to ask you about broadly overview. You've helped so many people working with Scrivener. I know I've read so many of your posts about how to do various things. Thank you for those, by the way. What kinds of authors and projects do you think do well in Scrivener?
Initially, it was designed for long form fiction. So that's its absolute sweet spot, where it excels, I think. It also was really good for long form nonfiction. Like I wrote Scrivener for Dummies in Scrivener, and it was very useful in helping me keep track of all the different parts of that book and the timelines and all that kind of stuff because I had to submit each chapter as it was due, and then I had to edit it when it came back, but I might still have other chapters that hadn't been written. So it's almost like a project management tool for your book in a way. That said, even though it's excels for long form, I think there are a lot of different ways you can use it, and there are a lot of different ways people do use it. I use it to keep track of my blog posts. So I write all my blog posts in one single project, and then that way I can organize them by year and month, and I can keep track of which website they were written for, things like that. And then I can search my entire history. I have 11 years of blog posts or something like that. And I can just search them all in one go very quickly. So that's not to say it can't work for other things. If you're writing articles or poems or short stories or anything like that, there may just be a slightly different way to use it that you would find useful. So for shorter things, I would probably have one project that is a collection of those things. And then for a longer project, like a whole book or something like that, I would probably have a single project per book.
Let me ask you, when you say collection, do you mean collection in the Scrivener sense, or do you mean collection in the
No, I just mean in the general
okay?
sense. Yeah, like I said, like my blog posts, or I even use it to keep track of speaking appearances that I have. So I have one project and I've got it broken up into webinars or in person workshops or whatever. And then I can just keep track of everything that I told them I would do. What did I send them was the blurb of the class and the bio that I was using at that time, and any kind of arrangements that we made and how long it was going to last and all that kind of stuff. And then it's all in that one place. So it can be really useful for a lot of different things. I know that you're talking to indie authors mostly, but I have had lawyers who use it, musicians who use it for writing lyrics, comedians, just a
Think
lot of
that
different people.
Do you think there's anything in particular about the characteristics of the people who do well with Scrivener? Because I know that I think there are Scrivener aficionados, and then we all go around and we tend to try to encourage other people to use Scrivener. And some people really take to it, and other people are allergic to it. But I don't know really who are the people who it's the best for.
That's a good question. I think what I usually find, the people who struggle the most are those who also struggle just in general with computers. If you're willing to explore and play a little bit in any software program, then you'll do better in Scrivener. If you think of Word, for example, Microsoft Word or Pages or something like that, those are limited use, right? They're intended mostly for business and they can do a lot of things, but generally you just go in, you write, you make it look the way you want, and you print or you send it off to somebody. And you don't need to know how to use mail merge and all these different features that most people don't care about. But in Scrivener, since the whole program was written essentially for writers working in fiction and nonfiction, they want to use all of it. And then they get overwhelmed because it's too much. And from that standpoint, I have two things I'll say to somebody. Like if I have a new client, for example, I might say, what was it about Scrivener that got you interested in using it in the first place? And sometimes they'll just say, oh, my friends told me I have to use it. And then I'm thinking, okay, with what you're currently using, what are the pain points that you have? And because Scrivener probably has a solution for them. If you are 100% happy in what you're using and it's not Scrivener, just keep using it. But for me, I was writing in Microsoft Word, nothing wrong with Word, but I was struggling because as I would get into a book, say 30, 40,000 words in, and I wanted to go back and maybe insert something into an earlier scene or modify a scene, or I'm working on revisions or something like that. It's just this single continuous document that goes on and on forever, and trying to find exactly what I'm looking for was a struggle. Not horrible, but just enough that it was irritating. So when I saw Scrivener, where I could break everything up into visual pieces, like scenes or chapters or sections, whatever you think in, that there was enough to make me want to use it. And it
Mhm.
would keep my place. So when I left off, wherever I left off, when I opened Scrivener the next time, it took me right back to where I was yesterday.
I have to
So
say, for me, that was the point that I was like, yes, I will take this software just because it starts me where I left off and not
yeah.
the beginning, because I think it's so easy with Word to go back to the first chapter and publish it again because you always start in the first chapter.
Yeah, I think since then, I've been using Scrivener for about 12 years. I think when I first started, Word didn't really have an easy way. You could put certain things in and then search for it and all that. It wasn't like instant. And they may have something now. But yeah, that was another thing that I was like, it just picks up right where I left off. I'm sold. Like, where do I send my money? I think I used the trial for 3 days and just went ahead and bought it because I was like, I want this. Not everybody is comfortable with how much there is on the screen with Scrivener. And there are ways to hide that, but you have to figure them out. And I think it will surprise you though. Some people who don't consider themselves really techie people love Scrivener and the other way around. I've had people who are like, I am so good at software and this one stymies me. So I think really it has more to do with what you're looking for out of the program and whether you're willing to spend a little time figuring it out. But I will say it's not just for plotters because that's a common misconception that people have is that, oh, I'm not a plotter. I don't need Scrivener. I was like, I'm not a plotter, which is why I need Scrivener because it helps me make sense of all of my mess that I have.
Yeah, I actually always thought that Scrivener was made for people who weren't plotters because it has this develop it organically built into the core of the software. So that's interesting that people have that perception. But one thing I want to ask you that's a side question is how do you feel about note cards? Do you feel that this is a loaded question, but you have enough experience with Scrivener, you'll have your own opinion. Do you feel like sometimes that's a gimmick that gets people into Scrivener because they think, oh, look at the pretty note cards, we can play with them. And then afterwards, nobody actually really uses them? Or are they really a thing?
They are a thing for some people. Again, I think it goes back to how you work. So if you're a storyboarder type of person, there are people who love to plot with index cards, or these days it's usually like sticky notes on a board or something like that. Whether you do that externally first or you just do it directly in Scrivener, you can just sit in the corkboard, create all your cards, put the little synopsis on each card, and you've built out the whole structure of your book before you start writing. So if someone is a true outliner, storyboarder kind of person like that, they may use the cards a lot. I personally don't use them much at all. I use the card in when I'm looking at it in document view and the little index card, the synopsis card is off to the right in the inspector. I use it for sure, but to go look at it in corkboard view, I don't do that a lot. But I do think it does entice people. And then they get in and they don't know how to use it. And so they get, I think that outline is actually a lot more useful because it can show you all these different pieces of metadata, which is just information. Like if you've tagged your files by, say, point of view or location, or if you want to look at word count and all this stuff, you can just have it in like a sort of a little spreadsheet view all at once. And I find that much more useful than the corkboard personally. But
I think
everybody's process is different.
you have a famous blog post that explains how you use the outliner. Because I have like it. My favorite posts from you are the one on searching and the one on inserting images. And I'm like, I don't want to miss any of your hottest posts.
I I do have a post on the outline. Basically on my website under the Scrivener articles section, I have a list of every blog post I've ever written on Script. So if you just do a Control F or Command F to search, you can just search for outline and you'll find it in there. Within the last year or two, I believe.
Yeah, I can find it. Are there any others I should look for that are favorites that I haven't mentioned?
I do have one explaining the new compile process for version 3.
All right.
Because that stymies people a lot. And formatting comes up a lot. Like a lot of people don't realize you can set a default format and then apply it to documents that don't already have it. And so they make it really hard on themselves going through and selecting the whole thing and then changing the format and then going and doing it again for another document. That's one that can just save you a lot of time.
You mean the format for when you're like when
Yeah, just when you're writing. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to impact when you compile it, which is the
right.
export, but yeah.
Okay, I'll look for that one too. Thank you.
Yeah, I probably need to do an updated version, but the concept's basically the same.
It's just it is interesting to me because when I was first thinking about this, I thought, oh, how do people get into Scrivener and why? And what do they actually do once they get there? Because it seems to me that they're often very different. And then some things you just forget because, as you said, there are so many things that Scrivener can do. And you're like, why am I not using this total immersion experience to draft? I just forgot that was an option.
Yes. There's things that I forget because they keep adding new stuff. And then when I'm currently working on the Windows version 3 class, and I had found all this new stuff when I did the Mac version 3 class, but that was, a few years ago. And so I was like, "Oh, I completely forgot that was there because I have an old way of doing it." So there's this new, shorter, quicker way of doing it that just isn't part of my habit, and I forget it's there. So I'm trying to train myself on some of those, or at least to point them out to other people. Half the time I just use keyboard shortcuts now, but
Sure.
there's definitely some things that are handy that I forget they add.
You have a favorite blog post on keyboard shortcuts too? Should I look for that?
I don't. The keyboard shortcuts are just listed in the menus. So if you have a menu item that you use a lot, just you can look it up in there.
Yeah. No, I just wondered which ones you use because
Oh,
they're often that if you'd written a blog post on it, I would go look for it. You don't have to try to rummage them up now.
no, but I use Shift Command T to open the project targets window, and I use Shift Command A to add annotations, and then of course like copy paste and
Yeah. Right.
um, some of
Right.
those.
Mhm. Okay. I think we've covered other people or projects you steer away from Scrivener. My next question was, does your recommendation vary by people's operating system, whether they're using PC or whether they're using Macs?
Actually, I just want to touch on one thing about people who I might steer away, and that's probably a strong word, but somebody who's writing a really picture heavy book, like a children's book, they could theoretically, if they're planning out the text separately, they could plan out the text in Scrivener, but it doesn't excel at picture heavy formatting. Like I've helped a client write a cookbook in it, but she wasn't doing a lot of like special layout for her recipes and things like that where you would want to use really InDesign. So some of those things where you would normally want like InDesign where you want to do very specific layout, you could still write them in Scrivener, but you wouldn't be doing the formatting, the heavy formatting in Scrivener.
Another conversation I have with people about that is people who want to write scientific things that have footnotes and that have heavy tables and that have images and tables and footnotes. Is that really too much for Scrivener? Like you can write the draft in there, but really you want to put the other stuff somewhere else? Or
You can do it both ways. I get a fair number of academic clients, and I really wish I'd had it when I was doing like a master's thesis, but you can absolutely do it. Scrivener supports footnotes. It doesn't If you're using like bibliographic software, you would probably keep all of your resources in that. And there's a way that you can compile Scrivener to RTF and then have that program usually will run through and fill in all the correct footnote and like notation or whatever. So I don't get into that part too much, but you can do figures, you could do tables, some of that stuff. It might be better to, it's originally intended as drafting software. If nothing else, you could do the heavy drafting and all the organization of the pieces and parts. And then later, when you're ready, you know, to submit it for whatever purpose, you could always compile it to Word and then fill in the images and tables that go along with it, where you do have a little more like visual control over the layout of things. Yeah.
I think that's what I thought you would say. That matches my experience. And
Okay.
that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so now I want to ask you, does your recommendation about whether to people should come in, does that vary now by Mac or PC? Or has this new upgrade changed that? Or
So I used to never turn anyone away. The Windows version that they've had for the last few years is still better than the original Mac version that I had. The biggest difference that the old Windows version had was the ability to compile in a really flexible way. And it was missing like alternating PDF pages and things like that. The new one should have all that. So
So the
I
new
just realized I haven't tested the PDF functionality, but yeah, the new version of Windows that just came out last month
right,
is almost an exact replica of the current Mac version. There's a few minor things that maybe just aren't possible to replicate in the Windows platform or something, but your average user would never notice them.
and maybe it's easier to answer but the related question, like who should upgrade to the new version? Is that the same recommendation for both Mac, PC, Linux, whatever else there is out there?
Yeah, so the Mac version's been out for a little over 3 years. So definitely if you're not on version 3, get yourself on version. If you have version 2, the upgrade's only half price. So it's like $25. For Windows users, I definitely do recommend the upgrade. There's some functionality issues that I think are really good. The new version of Compile is both a reason that people get a little freaked out, but it also, once you understand how it works, it is way more flexible and it has better capabilities. So all of that aside, if nothing else, at some point they will stop supporting the old version in terms of technical support and things like that. So it's always good to upgrade when you can. If you were really worried because you're in the middle of a project and you just don't have time to focus on the changes, I understand waiting till you get done with a book or something like that.
Like, do
Have a little
do
more
it
time.
and just go to book is due.
Yeah, if for no other reason that you will get distracted trying to figure out some things that are different. I do have a free transition courses for people upgrading just to show them like what's new, what's changed, what's moved. They redid all the menu structure.
I was puzzled when the quick reference turned up under navigate instead of view. I was like, really?
Yeah. But they added in the Windows version, which was already in Mac, under help, there's just a little search box. And if you type in the word you're looking for, a menu item, it'll just point to it for you.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I remember doing that when the new version came. I hadn't realized because I was using a Mac and was spoiled that the PC version hadn't come out. And so when the magazine editor said to me, "Oh, there's a new version of Scrivener," I'm like, "There is." And then I went to look at it, but no, I had that one. The other thing I want to ask you about that I have very little experience with is how do you feel about syncing multiple devices with Scrivener? Like, does it really work? And is there anything ironclad that you should not ever attempt, or how can you safeguard your stuff while working on multiple stuff?
So if you're going to work on multiple devices, there's a couple key things. One is you're going to want your working copy in Dropbox, and Dropbox is currently the only supported cloud service for working files. Like backup files, you can put anywhere you want because those are just backup copies. But for your working project file, which is constantly being updated with changes, Dropbox is the only cloud service that handles it properly. It's just a coincidence. Like Dropbox just happens to be designed in a way that works well with Scrivener, and the other services are designed differently and they don't always. So you can use them, but you're putting it a little more at risk.
Okay.
Number one, Dropbox. Number two is the only other real rule is if you're using it on one device, you want to close the project on that device. So let's say you're using it on your laptop and you're going to go work on your iPad. You're going to close the project on your laptop. You're going to make sure you have internet service so that Dropbox can finish updating with any changes you made. And you're just going to do that before you go open it on the other device, like your iPad. And then the same thing in reverse. So as long as you just close it before you move to a different device and you have internet so that the most recent version is up there, you should be fine. But keep in mind that it's not like Google Docs where it can lock one person out while someone makes changes. So if you were working with a partner and you were trying to do it that way, you absolutely can, but you would want to be communicating like, okay, I'm out of the document now. I've closed the project and it's synced. You're good to go. Or have some kind of work schedule or something like I will only work on it before noon and you will only work on it after 1 p.m. or something.
That's interesting because that's what I remember with Dropbox in the beginning when it was new. That you might go in and work on it and somebody else would come and work on it and then you would get very confused or people would clean up and delete things. You're like, no, we just deleted my file. You don't understand. So I wonder if that's part of the reason Dropbox works with the way Scrivener works is because it's somehow aligned.
I don't know. I don't know the whole technical workings behind Dropbox, but I think, yeah, it does a good job. But because really Scrivener behind the scenes, when you create a document for each scene or chapter, really Scrivener is that project file is just a folder that's holding all these individual documents in RTF format. Some of the other services, just the way they're designed, since it's all these little documents, it can get corrupted somehow. And I don't know what Dropbox is doing differently, but it seems to be able to keep track of all those.
I guess that's a question for me when you think about people, because I was asking people in our extended writing group here, what do you write with? And there's some diehard Google Dockers in there who do everything in Google Docs. And when I asked them, why do you like Google Docs? They said, because I can comment on things, and probably they appreciate that it can be locked out and then you can work on it. And then the next person can come in and you can work on it. But I wonder, do you think that people who use Google Docs to draft in general will be unsatisfied with Scrivener, or if they're happy Google Dockers, you would probably recommend to leave them there.
Yeah, it depends. If they just love Google Docs because they can access it from any computer, you could yeah, it depends on why they're using it. If they're collaborating, it may be best to just stay there. If they just kind of want to be able to work on multiple devices, you could absolutely do that with Scrivener, but you'd have to have Scrivener on each computer, which the license covers all the computers in your household that are the same platform. So it's not like a money issue per se, unless you're going to iPad, which would be it's like a $20
Right.
uh, app. Yeah, I guess it depends why they're there and whether they have any issues. Like I have a friend who uses Google Docs and Word a lot. She literally could ask me any Scrivener question she ever wanted, but she's happy with her process. So she doesn't have a reason to change. That's fine. I don't want to force it on people. It's amazing. And if you see a reason why it looks amazing to you, then don't give up on it maybe. But if it doesn't interest you or you can't see why you would ever want it, then I'm not gonna beat someone over the head with it.
No,
But I will say I did when a friend recommended it to me, I was like, what do I need writing software for? I already have a word processor. And then I opened it up and I was like, oh, now I get it.
I
So
think that's what I'm trying to get at, this underlying piece, because I think some people are suited for certain tools and they won't find other tools. So this is not the tool for me. It gets in my way. I can't accomplish what I want to do. And then it's clear it's not for them. And I'm trying to get at, because I do think people come to Scrivener and think, oh, look at the pretty cork board. And that, I don't know that the cork board is a good predictor for whether you will be happy in Scrivener or not. It may not be, depending on who you are, because I think people who really love cork boards, maybe they use Plotter or maybe they use something else that can really go to town with the cork boards, and they might like Scrivener anyway, but not for that reason.
yeah. Yeah, I usually just try to give people an overview of some of the reasons I like it and see if any of that clicks for them but
And then see,
yeah,
because as you
but
say, we don't have to, and not everybody doesn't have to use Scrivener. It's
no. But it's nice and flexible. It will flex with your process, pretty much whatever your process is. So
I do feel it's very much like Word, in the way that Word can do all kinds of things. Like Word can even make type tables. But if you go and push things to do those things, you will be sorry later, because that's not the core mission of the software. And Scrivener has so many things, but you don't have to use them all. You can just use the ones that apply to the way you work.
for sure. Yeah. And I find that like I've had people in the past who are like, oh, Scrivener can format for ebook and PDF. So I wrote this book, I'm going to import it into Scrivener and then I'm going to use it to format. And I was like, that's the only reason you're using it. Why don't you use something like Vellum or Legend Maker or whatever all the software that is designed just to format your Word document into ebook and PDF rather than go learn Scrivener just so you can input it and then spit it back out again.
Yeah, to me personally, maybe that just shows my age. Like having to move things from one program to another program to another program is very tiring, because if the program can only handle one part of the process, then I have to cycle back if I've forgotten something and then go through all the steps again. And so I prefer to do my formatting in Scrivener because it's all there. And if I correct it there, then
Right. Yeah. I'm already writing in Scrivener. I have people who will write in one thing and then they'll import into Scrivener to use all of its other features like the editing and color coding and all that stuff. And I've done a little of that, like when I injured my arm and I was dictating for a while, and then I would import the dictated text into a Scrivener file, and then I would edit it from there, which still allowed me to keep track of my scenes and keep all my unused scenes and take snapshots and all the good stuff that I like to do, add in notes and things. But for somebody, she was just, I think, writing in either Word or Google Docs and then bringing it over. I was like, why aren't you just writing in Word? She said, I don't know. I was just nervous about doing it right in there. Like, it's just a blank piece of paper, just like on your other thing. So I'm not sure what the disconnect was there.
Yeah, sometimes you have to stick a toe in first, I guess.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the snapshots. Very long ago, I used snapshots for my Scrivener projects, and then I discovered that they were blowing up to huge, enormous sizes, and I couldn't back them up anymore, and they were taking up all my space. I
Oh, wow.
assume that doesn't happen anymore, and I don't really know why it happened in that era.
Yeah, I guess it could depend on what's in your document, if you had a bunch of pictures or something, but honestly, I don't even look at my Scrivener sizes anymore because computers, the hard drives have gotten so big. But I guess when I use snapshots, I'm just doing individual snapshot of the document that I'm about to change. So I'm not constantly doing like the whole project or something like that. But the one of the things that came out with version 3 on both platforms is that you can now search your snapshots, which makes them a lot more useful. I rarely actually go back to an old version, but if I want to, it's really nice. Oh, I know I had a conversation in that version that I think I like better than the one I just wrote. But I don't remember which document that was attached to or something like that. I can just search the snapshots now, which is nice.
Okay, that's interesting because that sounds like very much the way I use. I when I'm working on something that I'm about to revise, I usually duplicate that piece in Scrivener, and then I just park it in the binder, and then I work on the piece. And if I want something from there, I can get it. And then after I'm done working on that piece, then I just delete it so that it doesn't make my overall file big. But it
Mhm.
could be that in the very beginning, because I didn't know what I was doing, I was just snapshotting the entire project, and probably it's multiplicative, and then all of a sudden, it's 300. I don't know. Yeah, I can't even remember what the unit was. 300 megabytes is probably not very many. I don't know. 300 something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to just not worry about keeping your old words, but or not worry about losing them, but not having to have a place in the binder. I do have a folder for unused scenes, which just means it's a scene I wrote and now I'm not going to use it. And I just stick it in there so I don't lose it. That way it's not in the project, the binder for the actual manuscript itself, but I don't lose it because I will, especially in the early days, I will write a couple different versions of the opening in order to get a feel for the story and the characters. And sometimes the winning version will end up being a mashup of two earlier ones or something like that. Or I'll go pull a scene out from the earlier one that still fits and plug it in. So I try not to get rid of anything, especially in the early days. But
I feel like every writer must have a deleted scenes folder. Like, I'm going to put them in there with, I might want this.
exactly.
Oh, then I wanted to ask you about both organizing larger projects. If somebody's making an writing a series or if they're making a standalone, how would you recommend that they set it up in Scrivener? And I don't know if I wrote project and global templates in there because I didn't know if that related to that or not. But that could be a separate question.
Okay. Some of it's preference. My personal preference is to have one project per book. But then what I do in order to help me keep the series cohesive is I have a series Bible project as well. And so I just always have the series Bible project open along with whatever book project I'm working on. And I won't really add anything to it until I finish the book. So, like right now, I'm starting a new series. And so my series Bible really doesn't have anything in it because I haven't finished the book yet. And so I don't know it's permanent. Like in terms of the character history or what car they drive or any of that kind of stuff. But after I finish this book, all of that will get copied over into there. So then when I'm writing book 2, I now have the history of the previous characters and the sort of world that I've built and the organization that they're in. And I always add a timeline. So this I will keep up to date as I'm working. So if I say, oh, she graduated college in 2005 or something, then I'll go back in the timeline and under 2005 graduated from whatever, had a baby 10 years ago. So that kind of thing. So then as I start working through the series, I can go back and look at, okay, I know he went to military training, but I don't remember when. So when would he have gotten out? So like trying to figure out the timeline of when things would have happened, I can just go back and check it in. So every time I figure something like that out, I will add it to the list. So it's a very simple timeline. I know there's timeline software and all that kind of stuff for people who have really complicated, huge family sagas and things like that. Mine, I don't, I haven't yet found a need for that. But yeah, so the series Bible is how I solve that. And then what I do also is as I finish each book, I will then put a copy of that book into the series Bible. So for the series I just finished, what's really nice is I have a crossover character. So I can go back and look at all the places where he was mentioned in the previous series just by searching in that one project. And yeah, it's just a really useful way to, it's a combination of both of what you were saying. But I don't write in one project with all the books in that one project. But if I were going to do like a box set or something, I could go back and I'd probably just create a new one, stick them all in there and figure out the formatting there. As far as templates go, then I think you could, if you're creating, you could create a template for books in that series so that once you've got your first book set up the way you like it, you could create a template based on that for all the subsequent books in that series. And what's nice is a template can still include if you had series related research or notes in there or character stuff, then that could be kept in the template so that when you create a new project based on it, you would already have all those notes and things in there.
Oh, now when you say that, I'm realizing what I was talking about. I think I was thinking about in the compile when you are saving a template and then you figured out your formatting for your first book, and now you're going to make your second book. So if you have a global template or a project template, you compile, what does that do?
Yes. Okay. That would be a format, compiled format. They have, yeah, the my formats and the project formats. So the difference is when you're saving one, if you put it in project formats, then it will only be attached to that project. So that is useful if you were, say, going to send it to somebody else and maybe they were going to compile it for some reason, or you're going to open it up on your desktop and you want to compile it from there. You're sending that compile format along with the project. Generally speaking, if you're just working on one main computer, though, I would save it to my formats because then you would have that format available to any project on that computer. You can always import and export compile formats too. So if you really needed it on two separate devices, you could just export it from one and put it on the other. So I 99% of the time, I recommend just saving the format to my formats. So it'll be on this computer. And then if you need to export it for another computer, you can.
It's a nice little sum. Thank you. That's
Yeah, I wish I did a better job of explaining that because people don't know what the difference is.
I have to say, when I think about the compile and try to think about how to explain it to somebody who hasn't ever compiled anything, I feel that the flexibility that is built into Scrivener is basically trying to always separate the shape of a book from the content of the book. And so that results in things like having to tell Scrivener something twice. Like, this is the name of the layout, and then this is the name of the whatever. I've forgotten what the things are. Not like when I look.
Yeah, there's section types and layouts. I try to think of it as like you're setting up all the rules. And the way they've done it now with the section types is each section type would just be an identifier for a piece of the book that's going to be formatted in a certain way. So every one of your scenes in your book is probably going to be formatted like all of the other scenes. So all of your scenes would get a one section type that you could call scene. And then let's say you have chapter folders that those are contained in, and you want to print the chapter heading. So then you would have another section type that tells Scrivener, these are all chapters. Whatever I decide to do with chapters from a formatting standpoint doesn't matter yet, but I've tagged all these as chapters. And then I've tagged all these things as front matter that are going to have titles on the pages. And I've tagged all these as front matter that are not going to have titles on the pages. So it is probably a more like programmer style perspective, but that's a good way of putting it. You're removing the content from it and you're creating the concept of the format for your book. And then once you've decided what the sort of 6 different ways something could be formatted in your book are, you say, this one's this way, this one's this way, this one's that way. Then separate from that, you go pick the layouts that each of those is going to be assigned to. And that depends on what you're trying to create. So for an ebook, I might have one kind of layout for my scenes. And for a PDF, I might have a different kind of layout for my scenes. So the nice thing is once you've established what type of thing that is, this is a scene, it's going to get scene formatting, whatever I decide that is for this instance, then you go pick what scenes are going to get. And that's where the power comes in because you have so much flexibility to change it on the fly
Right.
without having to go change every single document or go through the whole thing. And okay, these are all my scenes. I'm going to select all those or something like that. So once that clicks, I think it becomes a lot easier. It's still, there's a lot going on because there's so many little pieces and parts that you can tweak. But especially for ebook, there's very little you need to do for ebook because there's very little you have control over anyway. So that one's fairly easy. You set your chapters and your scenes and your front and back matter, and you just choose EPUB and you compile, and it's pretty much 90% of the time it's going to be there. So EPUB's especially easy. PDF is where you have a lot more dials you need to turn because you've got the trim size and the whatever you want the margins to be around the edges and the line spacing and which font and how big and all that stuff. Whereas in an ebook, the person reading it gets to control how big the font is. They get to control that kind of stuff. The e-reader itself will adjust and all that. So different e-readers will put in extra paragraph spacing and just things you don't have control over. So I try
Right.
not to worry too much about it with the ebook.
Yeah, I also think with the compile, it's almost just as important to know what not to touch, like what to leave alone, as what to mess with. Because if you go down too deep and you start tinkering with the formatting level, like inside it's funny. I don't ever talk to anybody about this. I do it, but I don't talk about it. So I don't know what the thing is called.
Yeah, the
You know,
section
like
layouts.
when you get all the way inside the section layouts and you start tinkering with which font you want to use, this no, don't do this here because you're going to break it. You will have changed it there, and then later on you won't know where you've changed it because it's so deep down that you won't find it easily. Whereas if you stay on this level and you say this is this thing and it's always this thing, and if it needs to be different than that thing, I'm going to name it a different layout or a different section type, and then it will always be that thing. But this kind of mental sorting of consistency, you almost always need to draw a picture or make a list of this name goes with this name and this thing goes with this thing. And then it's not confusing at all. But when you sit there and you think, what screen did I just look at? The names often sound so much the same, like chapter with title or
Yes.
section head with something. And you think, which one did I just look at? I forgot.
So the one thing they've done is they've added so that you can tell what it's linked to if you've already connected your section layouts and section types. Then when you go look at a layout, it'll say assign to, and it'll show you which ones. That's um, more recent, like last year or two. And then you can rename the layouts and you can delete layouts that you don't need and that kind of thing. So a lot of times if I'm working with a client who's trying to set up something very specific, and then when they're done and we're all set up and they're like, this is how I want it to look forever. As we're working on it, we will rename those layouts. So this is my front matter. This is my, first 2 pages layout or whatever. And this is my scenes layout. And this is my question section layout. Like we just name it exactly what they think of it as in their head. And then that way you're not working with chapter with title, chapter with heading with title. Yeah, you're exactly right. The way that Scrivener named them, those guys, they're very similar sounding. And so I will usually write it down as we're applying it. Okay, they assigned section type scene to whatever text with title or something like that so that I know what we're working with.
Yeah, I thought of two questions when you were talking before, which is when you're making the EPUB, one thing that I think is interesting about Scrivener, but I don't really know if this is true, there is a panel under the metadata where you can put in keywords and you can put in the ISBN number and the title and the author and a certain amount of copyright information.
Mhm.
And I always feel like that's then embedded in the EPUB. And so if you're a wide author, then you're sending your book out to the whole world to some little tiny stores that don't necessarily let you do anything. At least you've attached the metadata to your book that says this is a kid's book. It is that am I deluded? Do you think that's true? Or do you know?
As far as I know, those things are there's spots for those in the header section of the internal workings of the so an EPUB is really just like a it's probably XML, but like web language, right? So there's a section at the top where all that stuff can go. If you don't fill it in, it'll just be blank. So there may be services that use that. I always try to fill it in just in case. Who knows what Amazon and the other retailers are using from those files. But if they don't ask for that stuff, they may just look there. So it never hurts to fill it in
And I
unless you get an error on it or
right.
whatever. But,
There
yeah.
is a funny error for that, but I've forgotten what it is. Something like you put a hyphen in the date and then everything goes haywire and you get strange errors. And I think I've done that at least 3 or 4 times. If Vellum lets you do anything that's equivalent, they've never
I
used
have not worked with Vellum.
okay.
My guess is if it's something that can be put in there, they probably have a way to do it there. I've heard good things about
Very
Vellum.
exact.
Yeah. And it may not matter. It may just be part of the EPUB standard. But I'm guessing that publishers are probably filling all that in. But it doesn't prevent you from having to fill it in on each retailer when you're uploading. They're not going to pull it from there for you, but they may use it as part of their search.
I always think if you're sending it on like through Publish Drive or Street Live or someplace that's sending it to a million stores on the other side of the world, they're not going to get all the proper metadata through another way. So if you have it attached to the file, then maybe you have a chance that it will get sorted into the right slot. But
Yeah, yeah, it could be. I just always assumed it was worth taking a second to do.
a person after my own heart. That brings up the question with the EPUB, because in theory, right now, you don't need the Kindle Mobi format, so you don't need the Kindle Gen with Scrivener. Is that true, or are you uploading an EPUB to Amazon and then Amazon is crunching it into a Mobi and you don't know what's happening to it? Would you still want to produce a Mobi even if you uploaded an EPUB just so you could see if anything was going to go haywire, or is that overly?
Honestly, so I've been uploading EPUBs to Amazon for several years now without issue. So I was happy when they said that because yeah, they made Kindle Gen very hard to find and hard to download. And so they really don't want you doing that, I think. Basically, if you want to see how your EPUB looks on a Kindle, they recommend the Kindle Previewer. And that's probably what I would do because I've had people that will create a Mobi and then they'll side load it onto their, say, iPad or even their Kindle to see what it looks like. And it won't look the same as the version that you would get if you downloaded it through Amazon. For whatever reason, what they're doing before they push it out changes it in a way that you're not quite getting from Scrivener when you create the Mobi, even though you're using Amazon's Kindle
Right.
Gen software. I usually just use the previewer and then trust that that's what it's going to look like. But I've been sending them EPUBs for all my books recently.
That's good to know. And do you mean also the previewer that is when you upload the book on the KDP dashboard and then it says, okay, I've got your file. Now you can look at it on the previewer. Does that previewer work as well as the one that you download on your computer that is called Kindle Previewer,
I don't know. I usually use Kindle Previewer,
the one you download?
the one you download. Yeah, just because it's offline and so it's easier to me. But I would imagine it's probably the same underlying engine. But I don't know if you can play with I haven't looked at the one that's on the dashboard in a while. So I don't know if they have the same capabilities like to look at, oh, is this on a Kindle Fire versus an
Oh,
iPad versus they let you choose devices and things like
right.
that. Which
Mhm.
for the most part, I don't worry about anyway because I'm not writing books that are heavy with pictures. Basically, they have my cover, and then I don't even think I have my author photo in there anymore just to save space because I don't want to get charged for downloads.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I write kids' books, I tend to put in scene separators or sometimes little chapter images or keep them small, but they still probably add up. That this my other last totally esoteric question is I know that at least I think I know when I don't make a PDF with Scrivener when I'm publishing from a Mac because I want a print quality PDF for Ingram and for Amazon. So I make a docx file or I think I make a docx file and then I open it in LibreOffice and then I save it. Then I embed the fonts, flatten the transparencies, and then I save it as print quality PDF and then I can upload it. Because I read somewhere that the Mac system OS will not let you make a print quality PDF internally. Does this not apply to PCs? Do you make print quality PDFs another way? Am I crazy?
So I haven't worked with Ingram, but I've been making PDFs for CreateSpace that have been working fine for 10 years.
Amazon, I think, is more flexible. Like they will also take a regular PDF or
Okay. I'd have to look
okay.
because I'm pretty sure people can create them. Maybe you have to create the PDF and then open it and tweak something. I'm not sure.
I think the PC might be able to do it directly, which is why I'm asking because I don't have enough insight into the PCs to tell. Like I just remember when I was Googling, it was like, oh, you cannot do this on it. You cannot get here from there. And then they were recommending that you use Open Office or LibreOffice or any of these things.
But that's still on a Mac or
That's on a Mac. And so that's why I do that way.
I'd have to double check because it would surprise me. I
If I,
can be surprised.
I didn't have to do that anymore because it's annoying, but I've seen maybe because kids book authors often write things that go to Ingram because they need the
Yeah.
hardcover for the libraries and they need the paperback and then they need the other stores. And so I've given this set of directions to multiple people and to the point where just last week I was like, I should really write a blog post because I think I must not be the only person who has to do that because they got refused at the door. No, we don't want
Yeah.
PDF.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to do a little more research.
Like you never had to do it. And like I said, it's probably like
Yeah.
half of 1% of the writing population, which is already
Well, I know a lot of people who use Ingram for distribution. They'll use both because they want access to bookstores through Ingram, but they still want Amazon. So they won't use extended distribution on Amazon. They'll use Ingram for all their extended distribution and only use Amazon for Amazon, KDP for Amazon. It's worth knowing.
if I ever write my blog post, I'll send you the link.
I'll try to check up today to see if I can find something.
You answered so many questions. Thank you so much for taking all the time
Yeah.
and being behind the scenes at Scrivener. And I know you have some great introductory. I think I didn't ask you that question. Do you have a strategy for introducing people to Scrivener that works well for just about every writer? I know you have some introductory courses. That's where I would normally send people. But do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, my courses try to follow that. I usually try to give people a good solid overview of the interface for one thing so that they know what everything's called. We're all using the same terminology. And then the basics of like how to work with files in the binder, how to import, how to move, rename, add a new document, just get them oriented to how everything's related. If you click on this file, because the binder is basically just navigation of everything you have in your project. If you click on this file, you'll see it in the middle, usually the editor. And then you can just click in there and start writing. And then when you want a new one, you just add a new one. So some of it's just like getting them over like what's different because it's more than just a piece of paper. It's really like your file system on your computer plus the ability to write in it. And then I'll go through the inspector, just like a broad overview so they understand what that is and what metadata is. And then I usually try to find out what specifically they're working on and what kind of things they would like to do or would find helpful. We'll usually talk about searching, backups. A lot of times we'll get into the default format so I can get them so they won't use tab and they won't use double paragraph returns. And then beyond that, it's, oh, would you find it helpful to be able to leave notes for yourself in your text? And we'll look at annotations and comments. Would it be helpful for you to color code your documents by point of view or setting or where they are in the process? Then we'll look at labels and maybe status. So if they're a plotter and they think they want a storyboard, we'll look at the corkboard and stuff like that. Because some of it is driven by the kind of project they're working on and how they want to work or what their process is. But a lot of the basics are what I start with. I always feel like people, if I can just get people comfortable with writing a document and then adding another document and writing another one, then as they start doing that, because that's just like your word processor, but then there's so much more. Then I'll say like next time we come back, let's start making a list of things like, gosh, it'd be so nice if I could do this color code, or it'd be so nice if I could leave notes for myself, or what are the things, those little pain points that you're having as you're working, or things you don't understand. But I also recommend people just don't be afraid to look at every menu. Like when I first started blogging about Scrivener, it was because the friend who'd recommended it to me, we got together and I was showing her that I did something. And she's like, how'd you do that? And I was like, oh, I could blog about that. Because I didn't, it was back when they were like, all writers must have a blog and you need to put content on there. I was like, I don't know what to write about. So then after I got through all the things that I thought were interesting that I already knew about, I just started searching the menus for things that looked interesting. I'd be like, oh, annotations, what are those? And then figure out how to use it or whatever. I recommend people not be afraid to at least look through the menus to see, because you'll probably find something in there. Oh, I can favorite this project and then it'll always be in my favorite projects list, even if I haven't opened it in a year. Awesome. Things like that. So there's just a lot of little things that are fairly self-explanatory that you can find just by perusing the menus. And there's still things I forget about. Like the ability to move things around in the binder is great, but some people really struggle with dragging and dropping, but there's other ways to move things through the menus. So there's just a lot of little
And it
things
goes
in
back to
there.
your tip about play and explore. If you're willing to poke around it and see how it is, then it's not so intimidating because you can say, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." For me, I think there's also a difference between what can you do and why would you want to do it. Now, Scrivener has been around long enough that there are blogs like yours that can show people what the use case is. When would I want to do such a thing, and when would it help me to do it? Which is why I asked you about the note card. It's still puzzled over that one. I think I watched your new explanation of how to make them vertical, and I was like, I like them better vertical with the threads.
Hmm.
They're much better vertical than they were horizontal for me because my screen is not that big, so I can't see all my cards to sort them if I was going to sort them. So
Yeah.
that's interesting, but I still don't know if I will use that in future or if it was just entertaining.
Yeah, I know that thread thing. I think I can only see maybe where it would be most useful if you were using your labels for like multiple storylines or some kind of like timelines or something where you wanted to be able to yeah. I personally, I don't find the threads super useful, but I'm guessing that there was enough people, or maybe Keith wanted it for himself. I don't know. But
Asking, what do you use that? And somebody asked me after I had played with that. One of our editors asked me, "Can you?" I had labels that were point of view. She said, "If can I put one card on more than one thread?" And I was like, "No, that is a natural question because if you're using the threads for story threads, you want to mark where the nexus is, but they don't come together."
so labels and status, you can only have one value per document. Keywords, you can't do the thread thing with keywords, but those fill in the gap for when you want to be able to apply multiple tags to, like, I want this to be 1920s, but also I want it to be France. And then this one's going to be 1980s, but it might be London and LA or something like that, whatever. And Jonathan, whatever it is you're trying to keep track of. And I don't use keywords too often because I tend not to be a super heavy tracker of things. I used to try to use a lot of that stuff for setting and date and time and all that stuff. And I found it easier to honestly just put that in the name of the document. So each scene is like a word or two of to remind me of what that scene's about, like what they're doing. Maybe they're at a wedding. And then it'll say 7 p.m. Tuesday, 7:16, La Paloma Hotel or something like that.
I recently started putting blank texts into the binder that say day one, day two, day three, day four. And then I just slotted them in wherever the day was so that I could see when the day changed and keep track of if I was arriving at the proper time. And then just not including those in the compile. And that was easier for me to see than trying to. There again, there are so many places to hide things in Scrivener that if you're too smart and you do them consistently, there's so much power there. But if you don't do them consistently and then you've forgotten that you put it there, it won't keep you on track in the same way.
Right. Yeah, I used to do label for like story structure element or whatever, or status or one of those. But even that, I might have multiple scenes that are part of that story structure element. If it's the first turning point, it could actually be a scene in his point of view and her point of view or something
Right.
overlapping, whatever. So then I started using keywords and I was like, it turns out I just don't need to track it in that way. Like I have it in my head and I know what it fulfills. And I might go back at the end and make sure I didn't skip anything, but I don't need to take that time. And if it's not something I'm going to search or try to create a collection on, then I probably don't need to tag it in the same way. But for things like in my blog posts where I keep track of which location, which blog was it, my personal one, is it Writer or Unboxed or something like that's really useful because I can create a collection that will pull up all my Writer Unboxed posts and it automatically gets updated as I add new posts because the criteria is already set and it's saved. So something like that is very useful. It makes sense for me absolutely to tag that because I will use that to make sure I'm not like repeating myself or to find something like, oh, I'm pretty sure I wrote a blog post on that for one of those sites and I need to go back and find it.
It is now 7:37. I've talked to you for 7 minutes more than I'm allowed.
That's okay.
But I greatly appreciate it. Where can people find you and your stuff about Scrivener?
Okay, GwenHernandez.com is the sort of my main central site that can get you to anywhere you need to go. And I have a Scrivener section on there, which is where all the listing of blog posts are. The more recent ones aren't hosted on my site, so I have links to where they are. If you are specifically interested in Scrivener online classes, then I have scrivenerclasses.com. So that has those free transition courses for Scrivener 3. And then I have a new Windows fundamentals class coming out in the next week or so. And then I'll have a compile course for Windows coming out in the summer. And I have both of those already for Mac. So I'll probably be adding some more later in the year. They just take a lot of writing time away. So I'm trying to space them out so I can still get a book written.
I understand that completely.